everyone, my name is Jessica Brito. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a psychotherapist by trade. The month of March is Disability Awareness Month, so I'm going to do one more video on topics related to disabilities after this one. So the whole month I've been thinking what are some topics, and today I'm just going to touch on the top 3 mental health issues that we see in the disabled community. And I'll kind of address a little bit of the other ones in a more general way, and I'll focus today on the top 3. So for those living with a disability, it has been found that the disorders that we see the most, or not, I don't even want to say disorders because a lot of times that has such a bad name to it, but more like the issues that may come up are depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And the reason why is because a disability really takes a toll on our body, and like I've said before, physical health is mental health. So if you have a physical ailment, it's gonna hinder your mental health as well. So I'll start by talking about depression. If you guys saw my video on the 5 stages of grief when it comes to disabilities, you'll remember that depression was one of those areas. So why is it that so many people with a disability encounter this experience of depression? And there are many reasons why. First of all, depression is a chemical imbalance, and we really call it a disorder that has to do with behavior, meaning activity level, movement. The more you can move, the more things you're doing to stay active mentally, the lower your depressive symptoms will be. So people with disabilities or mobility issues or impairments could have increased levels of depression for the simple fact that they might not have enough serotonin in their body or their brain. Serotonin is kind of like that thing that keeps us motivated, going, and initiating. And so if we don't have enough of that chemical, we do see depressive symptoms. Another thing is also going to be isolation. Isolation plays a really big part in depression for anyone, able-bodied or not. However, sometimes we see that people with disability, due to many reasons, which you've seen in some of my videos, right? Either they're in the grief and loss process where they just found out they have this, or they just realized something's shifted, or even in my other video of socializing, right? If there is a lack of accessibility where the person with the disability or mobility impairment lives, then they might not be going out as much and interacting with others. And isolation is really a big part of depression. And it's interesting because depression will make you want to isolate, but isolating is what's causing depression. So the more that you can stay active and involved with people, the less we'll see some of these depressive symptoms. And of course, another reason why depression happens in people with disabilities is, like I said, right? It's a grief and loss process. Sometimes you get stuck in that depression longer than the other stages. And the way you would differentiate depression and sadness, because I tell everyone that they're very different, is sadness is something bad happened and I get sad. Depression lasts more than 2 weeks. There's a lack of motivation, a lack of movement, really a need to isolate, hide, and just not a desire to do most things, and feeling very low in energy and mood, okay? So this is why people with disabilities or in the disabilities community have higher rates of depression, and even suicidal thoughts or suicides are higher in people with disabilities because of the fact that they experience depressive symptoms. And like I've said in past videos, when it comes to suicide, suicidal thoughts are a symptom of depression. So anyone experiencing a life-changing event, whether it's a new injury, whether it's you've been disabled your whole life, but you encounter some roadblocks, some health issues, or just societal issues even, discrimination or lack of accessibility, lack of access to just everyday things, it will increase thoughts of suicide. So that's why we see suicide happen in the disabled community, or at least a lot of thoughts related to that. Also, depression is very common in our society. It's just not talked about enough. So that's depression. The second one is going to be anxiety. Anxiety, actually, when it comes to people with disabilities, is growing in research. It doesn't have enough research at this time, but it is one of the second leading disorders. It's really hard to describe it because anxiety has a lot of physical components, and having a disability, you already have a lot of things going on physically, so it just hasn't been studied enough, which we really need to do. But what anxiety is fear of the future, right? And so people with disabilities, a lot of times health issues, chronic health issues, or physical limitations, all these things cause so much uncertainty, right? Like, you might meet someone with a disability who puts a hold on planning their future at all because they don't know how their illness would progress, how their disability will hold them back. And that causes a lot of anxiety because it's a fear of failure, fear of the future, and it causes worry, nervousness, and again, some of that isolation because you have so many thoughts going on about what people think about you. And then, I mean, if you have a visible disability, anytime you go out in the world, people are staring at you, unfortunately, very often. Our society doesn't really know what to do with us sometimes. So that's going to cause anxiety. If you already have a really hard time with the thought that someone's criticizing you and then people are constantly staring at you or have an opinion about your life, which tends to happen with people with disabilities. For some reason, able-bodied people think it's a good idea. Let me go talk to this person because they have a disability and I want to talk to them about their life or what they're going through, or I want to pray for them. It's just a lot, right? A lot of invading of our space when you have a disability. And so that can cause a lot of anxiety. People might not want to go out as much because they don't want to be stopped and asked. They don't want to be stared at. If I'm getting in and out of my car, getting my chair in and out, people are going to stare. Personally, I've worked on it and I don't get anxious, but I know a lot of people in the community do. And then for people who have an invisible disability, their anxiety comes in when they need an accommodation or they need something related to their disability, and then they have to explain themselves. So multiple things add to our anxiety when we are disabled. A lot of it stems from fear of the future, fear of the outside world, just having to be an advocate all the time for yourself is draining and can cause anxiety. So that's kind of how we see anxiety in the disabled community. PTSD is post-traumatic stress, right? A lot of times our lives with a disability encompasses a lot of trauma, right? And we might become independent, we might become very self-sufficient, we might love our lives. However, sometimes that leads us to minimize the fact that what we've been through is actually really hard sometimes. Whether your disability is physical, whether you have chronic health issues, right? To be constantly in and out of the hospital, to have doctors that don't know what's going on with you when they're supposed to have all the answers, and to have tests or procedures done on you constantly, and at times people not even knowing why they're doing it or what's going on. It's traumatic. Right? Not to mention the people that woke up feeling fine, went to the doctor and got this crazy news that they were going to be disabled or that their health would be impaired for the rest of their lives, or just hearing that can be traumatic. And for those who acquired a disability and maybe actually went through a lot of trauma, car accidents, gunshot victims, surfing accidents, all these things are actually really traumatic. So PTSD looks like flashbacks of what happened, memories of the situation where you constantly remember being in that hospital room and getting the news, and you're sleeping and you wake up and you're like, oh God, I dreamt it again and I went through it again. It's hyper alertness, right? You might be more cautious, more scared because, what if you go to the doctor again? What if you have to go through that again? So do I really want to go out into the world if I might get hurt, if I might sustain an injury? Can I eat this? Can I eat that? So a lot of hyper alertness goes on with PTSD, and in people with disabilities, it might look that way. A lot of the negative self-talk, this is all my fault. Why am I like this? I should have done things a different way. So a lot of self-blame is a symptom of trauma and depression, anxiety. So that's the tricky part, right? That depression and anxiety are symptoms of PTSD. So you can have both, and the actual disorder is PTSD, not the depression and anxiety. So a lot of times people with disabilities don't realize that their everyday life can be traumatic, especially if they become really good at living it, right? And that's not to say that we should sit there and dwell on our trauma. And, you know, a lot of my clients say, well, what am I supposed to do? This is what it is, right? And yeah, that's true. But take a moment to sit there and mourn the fact that this is happening instead of trying to pretend that there was no trauma. There was nothing. Like, there was something. You've gone through a lot, right? We've gone through a lot. So that's kind of how we'll see PTSD in people with disabilities. And those are the top three. What to do with it? If you do notice that you're very depressed, I tell people, do the opposite of what your depression wants to do. I know we want to be locked in the house. I know we don't want to move. I know we don't want to be active. And activity, even if you're like paralyzed from the neck down and can't move physically, activity might look like spending time with friends. It might be being online and learning new research and just learning new things. Just keeping yourself active, even if it's physical, mental, whichever way you can. For anxiety, it's really learning to ground yourself and regulate yourself and learning to live in the present moment. Like, I don't know if my disability is gonna really take a toll next week, but I know that today I feel good. So let me enjoy this moment. Let me live to the fullest and be mindful of my body too. Like, if my body says we're stopping, right? Being very mindful is what's gonna reduce anxiety. For PTSD, it's really a combination of things. So for that one, I would really suggest getting help, because unfortunately, it's the only way sometimes, right? Unfortunately, that one's one that we can't sometimes solve on our own. We can do a lot of things to make ourselves feel better, but to get to the core, we really need to go to therapy. Now, when it comes to other mental health issues, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, ADHD, ADD, OCD, all those more broader mental health issues can occur with a disability, especially if there's any head trauma to the client. If you're an individual who at some point had some type of surgery that touched your brain or your head, they might have dysregulated some of your chemicals. So some of these things can develop and they exacerbate each other. So if you have bipolar disorder and on top of that you have a physical disability, they're seeing more of a correlation that people with bipolar disorder will have more health issues. So we can end up with other mental health issues, even if your illness is physical or your disability is physical, you can still have other mental health issues. So it's not one or the other sometimes. For some people, it's both. And the same way that we tell able-bodied people, go to therapy, we need to start saying it more to our community as well. So if you or someone you know has a disability and is struggling with some of these issues that I mentioned today, it's time to have that conversation with your doctor. And if you have a disability, you're like, one more thing that I need to talk to my doctor about, one more appointment that I have to go to, but these appointments might actually help in the whole, right? It's gonna help you mentally, physically, and it's really gonna get you to that next level that you wanna be in, because you deserve to be mentally healthy. And it really does affect your physical health, and I'll talk about that in another video. However, really take the time, talk to your doctor, start Googling therapists. And I know it's really hard, and I've said this in other videos, it's hard to find a therapist with a disability. So try to find one that has worked with trauma specifically, one that works with transitional phases of life, that has some experience with people going through something huge, because that's going to be the closest that we get as disabled communities to a provider that might understand a little. Because it's really hard, right? It's hard to be understood, and it's hard sometimes to talk to an able-bodied person about what we go through, Because again, we go back to educating. We're educating a lot, and a lot of us with disabilities are tired of educating providers and advocating to them, because a lot of times they might not know. But even that can be very healing. So don't hesitate to call if you need help. All right. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Stay tuned for the last video. And if you have any comments, any questions, please make sure to leave them in the comments at the bottom. Share this video, subscribe, like, and remember, stay mentally healthy.